So, my grandparents left me the old vinyl record players.
It doesn't say on air though.
Yeah. I went and got a Johnny Cash album and a Nirvana album.
That's okay as long as we're recording. Do we want to be on TV or do you just want to record it?
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we just want to record it.
Yeah.
So we're recording now then?
That's cool. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right, thanks. Talk to you soon.
Wait, buddy.
All right, bye. So we're not on air. We're not able to live stream, but we are recording. But we can go ahead and do that audio recording as well, just as a backup. Oh, we don't need to do this. Okay. Let's do both. Okay. Just so I don't trust technology. Especially right now.
I'd like to call to order the City of Bothell Planning Commission. Today is March 4th of 2020. All commissioners are present. We have come to the time of the meeting where we have a time for public comments for anybody who wants to address anything not on the agenda this evening. Is there anybody who wants to address anything not on the agenda? Okay, great. Then we'll move, I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes from February 19th of 2020.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, the motion is by Commissioner Courage, seconded by Commissioner Hampton. All those in favor of approval or of the motion on the table say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. New business, we can do that, okay. With that, we'll go ahead and continue the Downtown Public Space Code Amendments meeting. If there's anybody in the audience who'd like to speak to this topic, please let us know. Okay, there is nobody here to speak on behalf of that particular topic tonight. And so I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to continue the Downtown Public Space Code Amendments meeting to March 18th.
I move to continue the downtown public space hearing to March 18th.
Second.
Okay, so we have a new commissioner. I don't even know Amanda's last name. But is that the motion by Amanda? Commissioner Olson, sorry about that. My apologies. And seconded by Commissioner Pystrip. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So we'll be continuing that Downtown Public Space Code Amendments to March 18th. With that, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing for Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan Preferred Alternative. And with that, we'll go ahead and I think we're going to be led. Okay, well, Commissioner, Director Cotterman.
Thank you, Chair Vliet, members of the Commission. Mr. Blackburn is going to be doing a presentation for you this evening. The Commission has had two briefings, two study sessions on this particular topic, the Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan, and where we are in the process at this point. Tonight, Mr. Blackburn will give you the presentation. There'll be public testimony. This is the public hearing for what we're calling the preferred land use alternative for Canyon Park. The basis of that is to really give us the direction of the Commission that we can then take to the Council, check in with them to make sure they're comfortable with the direction that this is going, and then do the additional analysis, draft a sub-area plan, and the regulations that go with that sub-area plan, both of which will come back through the Planning Commission. So you'll see the sub-area plan and the development regulations that go with that as we move forward with that part of the process. So I just want to clarify for the Commission and for those in the audience this evening what this hearing is about. This is not a final decision by any means. We're not there yet. We're not even close to being there yet. We've got a few more months worth of work to do on this, but it's important to do this step in the process to make sure that that the Planning Commission and the City Council are comfortable with the direction that we're headed. that they can look at all of the analysis that's been done to date, which we feel is adequate for the level of decision that is being made at this time. So we are asking the commission for a recommendation to the council this evening, if you're comfortable with that. If you're not, certainly, we want to try to answer all of your questions this evening as best we can, and ask you to make a recommendation at the end of that deliberation that you have. And if you're ready at that time, we would like the commission to make a recommendation that we can then take to the council, hopefully in April. But if you're not ready, that's fine too. We have this as a contingent item for your next commission meeting as well. So if there are any questions about the process or the purpose this evening, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to fill us in on all the other information. I should also mention we do have our consultant team here this evening. Carmen, remind me of your last name. I'm sorry. Kwan. You're still going by Kwan? Yes. Okay. Carmen Kwan with Fair and Peers, Lisa Greeter with Burke Associates, and Rachel Miller with Makers Architecture. So they have been, they've been a super team to work with. We really appreciate all of their work on this. They have just been very responsive and doing some really top quality work through this. I've worked on a lot of different plans in a lot of different places, and I can tell you we have the A team working on this project. So we really appreciate all of their work, and glad that they're here tonight to help answer your questions and continue us through the process. So with that, Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission and members of the public. First of all, a little bit of business. We have 3 exhibits we've received today and last Friday. The first one is number 1, which is from Roger Bolanich. The second one is number 2 from Cheryl Shikala. And the third one is a letter from Tim McCarg of Van Ness Feldman. I just want to make sure, and they were put on the dais for you this evening. If you don't have one, let me know, and I will make sure and get it, because we got a couples. You don't have the third one? All right, so everybody's got those. All right, I just want to read those into the record. Of course, we've just kind of had a little bit of a discussion about this. The objective of tonight is to take some public testimony. We've got some people in the audience. It'll be great to hear from them. We want to have some commission deliberation, and we would like to attain a planning commission recommendation on a preferred land use alternative. This is important because it gives us the chance to do additional study. We have to narrow down the focus because right now we have a wide array of alternatives, and we need to narrow that focus down so we can do a much more detailed analysis on this project. A little bit of background. Tonight you're going to hear about some of the other alternatives really that were studied real briefly. We're going to talk a little bit about growth targets. We're going to talk about some of the preliminary market and economic conditions that are helping driving this plan, as well as talk about the preferred land use alternative concept that you have before you tonight, as well as talk a little bit about some of the transportation mitigation approaches. Now, certainly transportation mitigation is it's almost in its infancy, but we will still continue to do this analysis as we do these preferred alternatives. But we have a lot of good background data for you to consider. And of course, as always, you can find more information about this on the Planning Commission webpage and the Canyon Park dedicated webpage as well. And those are on the dais, and just let us know and we can give you more data on that. We are in phase 3 of this process. Now, this process started in 2017 for me. However, this is the process that we're right now in phase 3, and this kind of shows you a little bit of where we are in this in the protocol and how we've been working on this project. And of course, you can see we're kind of in the preferred alternative discussion mode, and this is a very good time for us to have that discussion, so it'll allow us to continue on. Big picture. I always include this because we need to remember what this context is. And that is that we are operating as a regional growth center. And that's basically something that is identified by the Puget Sound Regional Council, or PSRC. The Canyon Park is one of 29 RGCs, or regional growth centers. There was some new criteria that was issued by the Puget Sound Regional Council that means Canyon Park has to increase its planned population and employment capacities. Right now, we don't quite meet those standards. We may have to make sure we meet those provisions. We also have certain growth targets we are responsible for meeting within King and Snohomish County. In this case, it's Snohomish County, though we also are using this opportunity to make sure we meet as well. And let's not kid ourselves, growth is on its way. These are some projections from PSRC and the Office of Financial Management, which is basically the state agency that does population projections. By 2015, the region is planned to accommodate another basically 3.4 million jobs and 5.8 million people. You can see what the actual growth has been and the forecast. This is a very reasonable forecast to plan. So we know that growth is on its way. So why Canyon Park? Why is this so important? Well, a couple of reasons. One is thousands of high-tech and biomedical jobs. We have literally thousands and thousands of people working out here in some incredibly important fields for both human services and human population, as well as they do some amazing high-tech things that, again, basically help the human condition. We have some really good regional transportation options here, including Interstate 405, 527, 524, as well as 228th Street. There is a great potential for growth within this area. And I think that is one of the things that I think that we will be demonstrating as we go through our capacity analysis. There is room for growing. And we have learned over the past 2 years that jobs and homes can coexist. We can have those things in close proximity. That's not something that is mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Miller. She is a principal planner with principal architect probably, with Makers Architecture. She has been the lead consultant on this effort.
Thank you, Bruce. So as Bruce has mentioned, this project has been going on since 2017. 3 years of Bruce and Mike's lives have been dedicated to figuring out Canyon Park. So as you can see, they've really reached out to a lot of folks and talked with a lot of people over a long period of time. There's been a spurt of activity recently as we've learned that there are some specific topics that we needed more information on. But there's been a lot of effort since 2017 trying to understand what the interests are of people working and living in the area. So back in 2017 and 2018, a visioning effort identified this area as the existing job center that it is and furthering that. So as an economic driver for the city of Bothell, but also really wanting to see it as a multifaceted neighborhood that works better for the people working and living in the area. The wetlands and North Creek were identified as amazing assets, so connecting to the natural environment and highlighting that. And that it's a transportation hub, and I'll talk more about how it's a regional transportation hub. So during our work on this project, we did do a survey in 2019. And so this is just one of the summaries, but this is corroborated by all of the engagement that we've done at all the other events. So the things that people really care about in this area are those wetlands, creeks, and natural areas. Those are some assets that people really want to see stay in the area, be protected and respected. Trails and employment opportunities, small businesses in the business park and in the retail areas are important. And then investing in the area, this comes up again and again in any different way you ask the question, is traffic and transportation. And we'll talk a lot about that tonight too. But also parks and pedestrian network, transit, and more restaurants and amenities in general, part of that multifaceted neighborhood. Earlier this year, we did do, actually, the end of 2019, we had a draft environmental impact statement. And these are some of the comments that we received during that comment period. So we heard a lot about transportation issues and the appropriateness of that regional growth center and the new criteria that Bruce mentioned. And I'll get more into that, the amount of growth that means and whether or not that center is appropriate. Adequate and feasible mitigation. So looking at that growth, what are we doing to make sure, or what would this plan recommend to make sure that it is functioning as a center? And these other ideas, there were great ideas for things looking forward also, like curb space for deliveries and transportation network companies. So like Uber and Lyfts and deliveries, how is that being treated? And then just a lot of support for mixed use and transit-oriented development. So what is the challenge? So Bruce mentioned that this is an amazing place in the region for a lot of reasons. One, it's got all these regional assets. It's got I-405, Bothell Everett Highway, the Park and Ride, and wetlands that are all making this area serve the region, but also complicated by that, pretty constrained by the land given up to the wetlands or that are used by wetlands, and then these amazing regional transportation systems that all come to a point here in Canyon Park. If we do nothing, our analyses show that transportation will get worse, and also we can't ensure what land use development patterns would be as much. So making sure that we see that multifaceted, holistic neighborhood might not happen if nothing changes, if we do nothing. So, given the amount of transportation challenges in the area, we do need funding. And that regional growth center criteria, or the regional growth center status, is important because it makes Bothell competitive for transportation funding, federal transportation funds that come through Puget Sound Regional Council. So, we need to show in this plan how we can address the challenges. It's also changing times. People want to see more amenities in the area. They want to be able to walk or have the option to take a shorter trip to their workplace. So that mixing of uses is important. And we are seeing that millennials and younger folks are shifting the way they use transportation, and people are owning fewer cars. So slowly over time, as places evolve in our region, we are seeing this mix of uses happen more and more. So the challenge for this whole sub-area plan is ensuring that growth makes Canyon Park better. Bruce mentioned again the Regional Growth Center and these criteria. So just to throw some numbers out here that we've been working with is that there are 15,000 people in Canyon Park right now. We need to add 13,700 new people in the Regional Growth Center. That's a mix of both residents and workers. And of those 13,700, 4,500 of them at least need to be residents. And what those numbers do is it get us to this 45 people per acre that the Regional Growth Center criteria asks for, and it meets the Bothell and Snohomish County growth targets for residents. So some of you all may have even been here for this work. Back at the community scoping meeting, we looked at figuring out, okay, with these numbers, what do we do? What kind of development can we expect? So we looked at some reasonable development typologies and placed them on maps, figuring out looking at what type of redevelopment and what development, where the possibilities might be, and came up with a range of alternatives. So the no action alternative shows what might happen if we don't change any zoning and things just progress as they have. The business plus and live work alternatives were these action alternatives that placed these building types around in different ways. One focused more on jobs, one focused more on residents. And then when we discovered that this was a lot of growth and the transportation challenges were pretty intense, we scaled it back, and I'll show in the next slide how we did that through the Regional Growth Center boundary, but we also looked at just meeting the 45 people per acre minimum. And that got us to that 13,700 people. This mitigated live-work alternative got us to that right number of people, and it got us to a good mix of 28% residential. So as I mentioned, one of the ways that we scaled back was to shrink down the boundary. So the blue area was the original Regional Growth Center boundary that we analyzed in the draft EIS, although the current one on the books is actually the black one, the black dashed one. And we've shrunk it down to the red one to try to make it easier to meet that density requirement. So Lisa is going to talk more about how this is realistic and how we might get there.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Lisa Greeter. I'm a principal planner with Burke Consulting. I'm here to present our team's work. We did prepare some socioeconomic and market information, as did the prior team working on the 2017 vision report. So some of this information you'll see in existing documents, the vision plan, and then existing conditions report and draft EIS. And as part of the sub-area plan, we're working on the market study and pro forma, and we're presenting some of those preliminary results tonight. So first, in terms of how the area is performing today. In terms of office and retail, the vacancy rates are lower than the region. And the flex space, where you see some of the light manufacturing, the vacancy rate is a little higher. However, the rental rates are a little higher than the region. There's demand for mixed use and retail. For office and flex space, it's supporting office uses and industrial that benefit from having lower cost and sometimes plentiful space. The area has been growing within a lot of the same footprint. So the map that's on the left of the screen is showing the last 5 years of permits, and the darker the color, the greater the value of the permit. The bar chart is showing different types of permits over the last 5 years. There's been about $116 million worth of investment in the area, a lot of it in major and minor tenant improvements, and relatively less in new construction. And yet we see the jobs have been growing in the area. That's on that upper line graph. Over the 15-year period, 2002 to 2017, the average growth rate is about 2.5%, and then more recently, since 2010, about 3.3%. So what's happening is the businesses are adding employees in existing space and improving them. They're also adding additions as well. In terms of projections, we're looking at both the local conditions and the regional growth strategy. So right now, the regional growth strategy is the Puget Sound Regional Council Vision 2040. And as reported in the vision report for Canyon Park, the Snohomish County portion of Bothell was expected to capture around 6,600 employees through 2040, and the average annual the compound annual growth rate was 1.4%. The region is about to adopt a new regional growth strategy that goes out to 2050. We don't have a Bothell-specific number, but Bothell is a core city, and along with Linwood. And so we can kind of roughly look at what the share that's going to Snohomish County, to the core cities, would be. And looking at that, the combined growth for Linwood and Bothell is about 2% per year. In Canyon Park, as we showed in the prior graph, there's been a little bit higher average growth, 2.5% to 3.3%, depending on if you're looking at 2002 to 2010 as a start year. If you just look in the even more recent history, the growth has been a little higher, 3.9%. So we took a look at those regional projections and trends, and then came up with, well, what number of jobs could we expect in the Regional Growth Center between 2017 and 2050? And the bottom line there, that would add about 8,900 jobs, would be taking the growth expected through Vision 2040, but carrying that growth rate out to a common horizon year of 2050. The share of growth would be similar to that received in Bothell and in this area since 2010. The moderate and the middle line there would add about 10,500 jobs, and that's based on Vision 2050 and a share of growth that's more like that received since 2002. And the high is assuming that Bothell captures 1/3 of the growth that's assigned to the combined core cities of Linwood and Bothell, and that 95% of that lands in Canyon Park, which is your primary commercial and job center on the Snohomish County side. So where would those folks go, or how much space would that be, and what does that look like? So it would be about 2.7 to 5.1 million square feet of additional commercial space. That's about 80 to 160,000 square feet annually. And in the last few years, we've seen higher than that, at 150 to 250,000 square feet in the recent past. Where would that go? It could be that those folks get absorbed in owner-occupied facilities, so where we've seen Juneau and other businesses making a more efficient use within their current campus or making additions in owner-occupied facilities. It could be in the flex space where there's today fewer jobs, but they're putting more people into existing buildings with smaller footprints per person. Or it could be new floor space. And again, that permit map is the same as in the previous slide, and I just threw it up there because it's just showing in the last 5 years we have been seeing those first two ways in which employees are being added into Canyon Park in particular. In terms of new floor space, there's capacity analysis. The map on the left, we had a table in the draft EIS that reported Snohomish County's analysis of the city's growth expected from 2015 to 2035. We had a table, but we didn't have a map that went with it. This is the map that would go with the table, and it shows in the colored properties which ones were included in the analysis, and those with the hatch marks at the time were under review for mixed use. We've been doing some updating in our work since the 2015 analysis to look at permit trends and other permit activity. And what we're seeing is a population capacity for between 4,500 to 5,300 people. And that's in that full study area. So that's a little bit beyond the regional growth center, but most of the growth is in the regional growth center. And employees from 4,000 to 4,800, and this just depends on which properties you assume are going to be mixed use. If you assume that those properties that have had more recent employment permit activity stay employment rather than mixed use, you would get you'd be on the higher end of the job range and a little bit lower on the population range, but we would still make the city's goal for target for population in the center. The land capacity is important to look at because it's part of a regional methodology to see based on today's plans what you might expect to see for new capacity. But it's based on employment densities that you would have seen in the past because it looks at permit histories over the years and says how many jobs per acre are there. The action alternatives are pivoting a little bit to what are some new typologies that could work in this center given the conditions today and the expected conditions in the future. So you'll see some photos there of building typologies that kind of match the building blocks that were used at the public workshops that Rachel showed earlier. The photo on the lower left is a building in Federal Way, East Campus, and the photo on the right is in Redmond, Bear Creek Parkway. And so these are well under the 100-foot height that applies in this area, but they're still multi-story, about 5-6 stories, showing another way that in the future you could get a little bit more compact development. In other words, the future doesn't have to look like the past in terms of job densities. Our team also looked at a pro forma analysis that looked at the feasibility of development on 3 different example sites in the study area. We worked with makers who produced some rough concept plans for what could fit on those sites, and then did some analysis on the cost of development and whether that would be practical to have a return on investment for development. So the first project on the north there, near Thrasher's Corner, Maltby Road, looked at a residential retail mixed use. And then we also looked at a commercial retail mixed use kind of near the transit area, a little bit east of Bothell Everett Highway. And then the third one was further from transit investments, but it was an example of infill, adding a building on an existing site. So it could be an example of a owner adding a building. And we're looking at today's conditions, today's rents, today's situation. And this table is a summary of some slides that Andrew Bjorn, my colleague, presented to you in February. And in terms of the mixed-use project up north near Thrasher's Corner, that one was found feasible today, primarily if parking requirements are reduced. So that would be a policy change in terms of parking reductions. But as was studied in the draft EIS, the idea is to reduce parking closer to transit investments. So it's found feasible with that code option. We also tested whether or not affordable housing would be feasible, and it could be achieved through the multifamily tax exemption program if you have impact fee reductions. That was a goal for the city to look at affordable housing in this area as well as just market rate. But one thing that was found is that mixed use development and residential is feasible, and if not properly managed could overtake the potential right now for employment development, and you've been seeing that in some of the applications that have come in. And so over the 20 years, you'd want to be careful how to manage the area, and I think Rachel will be presenting the live work and the modifications to it that get at that issue of trying to make sure the core of the business area remains for employment use, with other areas designed for mixed use. For commercial redevelopment today, the project would be infeasible. That's the one closest to Bothell Everett Highway. But changes in market conditions and investments in transit would make that likely feasible in the future. And then the last one that was the furthest from transit, where there was a potential to add a building to the site, was found not likely to be practical under today's conditions, but reducing parking standards could help. And there was also a note that owner-occupied projects have been occurring and could occur in the future as well. So we did this analysis to help test today's conditions to help us and think about what might be different in the future with investment so that it could help shape the policy and regulations. So for example, you saw some notes there about, well, it could be feasible with parking or with greater investment in transit. Things like that can help us shape a plan that can overcome some of those obstacles to feasible development.
Thanks, Lisa. So that's a lot of the background information that shows the numbers of people that we're trying to work with in this area. And now we're going to talk about what that actually might look like and how it might actually fit. As I mentioned before, we had a mitigated live-work alternative, and we've now moved closer to a middle ground concept, where this is mixing the earlier business plus and live work, getting more of a mix where it's both residential but also office oriented. So the big deals in this concept is this focus around transit. So knowing that the Swift Green Line is coming down Bothell Everett Highway to the Park and Ride, and knowing that there will be an I-405 bus rapid transit line coming to a flyover stop right there where that yellow line crosses I-405. That's the big deal. And we're trying to, as Lisa mentioned, the parking reductions are a big thing that makes development feasible. Knowing that you'd be able to walk to your transit or take a bike or a little scooter is what can make this area function a lot better. So knowing that, the focus is on those 3 notes that are on the bottom left. So that 17th node, Park and Ride, Canyon Park Place node. And the ideas here are that in those areas, you would see the most intense development, the most people closest to transit. And then spreading from there, more residential in the more orange areas, and then up in Thrasher's Corner, that might evolve later. But the city would really focus on this area right around good transit. Those yellow lines mean that we would like to see those be really lovely places to walk and bike into and out of the transit areas. So connecting into the PCC area, ideally those green stars would be gathering places. So with redevelopment, seeing a really lovely Main Street type environment there that would then connect into the neighborhoods to the south. Going to the north, the big idea there is, again, a nice street, but then really that east-west yellow line with the green star that gathering place and that east-west Main Street line, that's your major connection into the business park. And it wouldn't have a lot of traffic on it, and with redevelopment, the ground floors could be lovely environments where it might be retail, it might be restaurants, might be cafes, it might even be offices, but as long as there are entries, windows, awnings, those kinds of things, they could feel safe and comfortable to walk by. It also aligns with the bridge crossing over the trail, and ideally that gathering place would be somewhere near North Creek so that we get at that idea that a lot of you all have been asking to really connect and celebrate North Creek as an amenity. Going up 17th and eastwards on 220th, the yellow line there is a little more loose. We just mean that that really needs to be a safe place to walk and bike and connect further, knowing that there will be residences or could be residences near North Creek, and then getting further into the business park. So there is a park and ride existing already. One idea is to emphasize transit-oriented development at that site. And then south of 405, there is an idea to pursue partnerships to work on a park and ride there as well with redevelopment. So it's an idea that we're exploring. Further east, where the purple lines, or the purple gradient occurs, is the existing business park, and really wanting to, just knowing that that is a functioning business park with those wonderful businesses that Bruce mentioned, just making sure that that stays functional, maintain that as a great flexible employment center, and with the amenities and services that they'd like to see. So ideally with redevelopment, we'd see more cafes and little private gathering spaces coming in there. So looking at what that means in a little more detail, here are the land use designations that we're looking at. So the pink colors are what I was talking about earlier, the density starting close to the transit center at I-405 and that 17th Ave southeast. So, and then moving from there to lesser and lesser densities. And I'll go through each one to give you a little bit of an idea of what those might look like. While I'm on this map, I'll also point out that with redevelopment, one thing that we would recommend is mid-block connections or through-block connections. So the little tiny green dotted lines is one way that these big blocks could be broken down as they change and evolve over time. Again, none of this is going to happen overnight. We're talking out to 2040, 2050. So this is really long-term that these kinds of changes might happen. But ideally, those through-block connections would make it a lot easier to get to and from your destination, even if you're not in a car, or ideally if you're not in a car. So that most intense land use right by I-405 is this dark pink reddish one. And what these are setting some parameters around what the building sizes might be and the types of uses. And the red and pink zones, office or residential, would be allowed on the upper floors. And then the ground floors in certain areas where a Main Street designation would be, we would like to see ground floor, an active ground floor. So like I was talking about earlier, frequent entries and windows types of things. When you see the word FAR, that means floor area ratio. And so it means the square footage of the building as compared to the overall site. So the larger the number, the bigger the building. So you'll see a range here. So the setting the minimum densities, I'm not sure what changed. So we set both a minimum density, but then the target density that we would like to see. And so the sub-area plan will set forth recommendations to say how we might get to those target densities to meet that 45 people per acre. So again, this is the most dense area. These are kind of the buildings you might see. The big thing here is less parking. Because people would be, we make the assumption that people can walk they're within a 5-minute walk to this really good regional transit. The next zone out, that middle pink area, there's one southwest of 405 and Bothell Everett Highway, and then one north of the darkish red areas. So 2 areas here, and then a third one up near Thrasher's Corner. So this is just stepping down. So now we're in the 5-minute to 10-minute walk to transit range. So knowing that it's a little bit further away, people are going to be a little more car dependent. That parking, again, is driving a lot of what type of development is feasible. So knowing that the densities will be a little bit less here. More of the lot will have to go towards surface parking or other uses. And then the lower intensity area, this area is around North Creek. There's been a long time proposal for a part of this area and then existing residential to the west side. So just knowing that this will be a little lower intensity since you're starting to get into closer to the 10 to 15 minute walk to transit. So then the residential mixed use area, there's one more intense one, the high one, up at Thrasher's Corner. And again, from that concept slide earlier, I talked about how the focus would really be around I-405, but we don't want to forget that Thrasher's Corner is also a lovely place connecting to neighborhoods farther north in unincorporated Snohomish County. So as this area develops or redevelops over time, this would be the type of vision for that, these types of buildings and this kind of intensity. So again, 6 stories, about less parking since it's right by the green line. An easy walking distance to that. The residential medium, there are 2 areas here for that. South, around 228th Street Southeast, and then up closer to Thrasher's Corner. So these 2 areas. This is kind of an interesting density because you generally achieve it with larger sites and by mixing apartments and townhouses. So it's kind of an interesting little way to step down from a higher intensity, more urban feeling environment into more single family or lower density environments. The employment medium, now we're talking about more in the business park. So east of North Creek and then west where Phillips and Juneau are, west of Bothell Everett Highway. And then again, another area farther north near Thrasher's Corner. So these dark purples, looking at, as Lisa was showing, these more intense office environments. So if somebody is gonna tear down a lower intensity 1-story building, getting more of this, more jobs in there and more compact development. Further out, we are talking like 15 to 20 minutes to great transit, 15 to 20 minute walks, excuse me. And so here it's a little tougher to make the case for really high intensity development, but we still would probably see, if somebody were to redevelop, it would probably be more than what you see there on the ground today. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, also there are owner-occupied buildings where people might be interested in developing on their own land. Did I skip one? Yes. So, connecting land use and looking at what people are doing or how many people are in the buildings. Well, what do they do when they leave the building? So this is a big bugaboo of Canyon Park, is the commutes in and out of Canyon Park. People living here, people working here, how are they getting around? So as you see, there's a lot of people living north of Canyon Park in that dark blue big circles, but there are people all over the region coming here. It's really, really an amazing employment hub. So some of the big things that are driving a lot of our thinking here, as I've mentioned a couple times now, is the transit. So we know that there's great transit coming in along I-405, connecting Linwood, Bellevue, Renton, and Burien. And then there's this 17th Ave express toll lane access or direct access ramps to the center of I-405. And so buses would be able to use this and people using the express toll lanes. So that's right by the existing park and ride. And that's a WashDOT project outside of this project, but we are assuming that project happens. So knowing that we've been talking about all this growth and that number of people, we looked at how the system can function. And we knew that Bothell had done a lot of planning for their 2035 comprehensive plan. And so we assumed those projects. That's the yellow projects that you see on this map. And so those are already improvements or things in the hopper that should happen anyways. The new things are things that we added because we're saying oh geez, this is a lot of people and a lot of delay that we're starting to see on Bothell Everett Highway, State Route 524 or Maltby Road, and 228th in particular are the ones that the city are looking at for their standards. So the blue and the blue lines and the blue circles are either street connections or expansions or intersection improvements that we've added into the mix based on the numbers that we're looking at for Canyon Park, the numbers of people that we're looking at for Canyon Park. So some of the big ones are 214th Street, and so connecting Bothell Everett Highway and 9th Ave, and I'll get into that more. And then 20th Ave behind the Fred Meyer up at Thrasher's Corner, a north-south connection that would connect back into the business park. And then 228th, widening that road to have more lanes, getting people from both this business park and the one to the south over to I-405. So those are some of the big projects we're looking at, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've been hearing about those. And then Carmen will tell us more about the analysis that went into these and further questions on the table. So what we really learned is that we can't really build our way out of congestion, so we've really got to focus on the first and last mile, and what we mean by that is how do you get to transit? So if you're plopped off at I-405 and 17th, what do you do? How do you get to your job? Or if you're living in the area, how do you get around in a really convenient, safe, comfortable way? So some of those ideas are transportation demand management strategies and programs. So businesses in the area could offer bus passes, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure throughout, so that the North Creek Trail, which is pictured here, is a wonderful way through the business park already, and connecting neighborhoods to the park. So expanding on those kinds of things and having really safe places and places buffered from traffic. Being able to walk through the area. Bicycle and scooter shares. This has been a very popular idea at all of the meetings that we've had. So people being able to hop on something and just get from the bus to their work or to their home. Another idea is circulator shuttle. There's already one functioning in the park, but making something that's frequent and easy to use, getting people around who aren't able or don't want to use a bike or scooter or by foot. Charging for parking is another way to encourage people to use other modes of transportation. So we've heard a lot about this pedestrian and bicycle focus. So I just wanted to highlight again, this brown line through the area is the existing North Creek Trail. There might be a couple places where connections could be made and gaps filled. But then these green lines are the things that we've heard about in this process or proposed through this process. So better crossings over Bothell Everett Highway, gaps in sidewalks. At every meeting we go to, we find out about a new gap. And so we keep adding to the map. And then this idea of new connections like 20th Ave and 214th, whether they become 214th in particular, whether it becomes an access for a car or not, it's still the idea that it could be a trail coming through it is something we've heard. 9th Ave, I'll talk more about that as well, but continuous sidewalks along 9th Ave. And again, the through block connections within the park, breaking down those super blocks. So the big idea here, connecting to transit, connecting to the business park, and connecting to assets in the community. So we did have a meeting with 9th Ave residents and 214th Ave residents and talking about, okay, if this idea of a street punching east-west between Bothell Everett Highway and 9th Ave, if this really has to happen to relieve congestion off of Bothell Everett Highway, what do we need to do here? And so we learned that most residents feel impacted by that and are opposed to the idea of it for vehicles. There's a lot of support, though, for a trail going east-west. And then if we absolutely have to do a street connection with vehicular access, making sure that the 9th Ave improvements are a priority first is something that we really heard clearly. And so just to talk a little bit about 9th Ave, we know that there is an elementary school. We know that there's speeding traffic. And there are ideas that we would explore for continuous sidewalks, intersection improvements, whether they're roundabouts or signals, setting a low speed limit near the school and enforcing it. And I think, as I mentioned, continuous sidewalks and buffered bike facilities so that it's really safe walking up and down or biking up and down 9th Ave. And phasing that so that these kinds of things would start coming in before any connection is made. We had a 20th Ave workshop with representatives from Fred Meyer and the strip mall to the north of Fred Meyer. And the idea of putting a north-south street just to the east of Fred Meyer was very well supported with them. So that's one that has ecological impacts, although if we sneak it in close to the Fred Meyer without impacting their loading and unloading, we might be able to mostly stay within wetland buffers rather than wetlands. So we're still exploring options there of what types of routing it might have, but the ecological impacts are really what we're worried about here. There doesn't seem to be a big impact to businesses or residents. We also just met with the life science businesses, Life Sciences of Washington, and this is a group of businesses that are in Canyon Park. Really exciting work, as Bruce mentioned, that they do. And their biggest, strongest interest, I would say, is those ways of getting to and from transit. So the buffered bicycle routes, pedestrian paths and trails, really good transit system serving the area. They really liked the idea of a collective shuttle or that circulator shuttle. And scooter and bike shares, they see their employees really using that type of thing. And then just generally the overall transportation system. It came up a couple times with them, this chicken and egg issue where we're just, this great transit is coming online, but there's also a lot of people still using cars. So making sure that both work in this interim evolving period. Strong land use interests as well. They are a life sciences hub, and they really can see this being an attractive place, like for the creative class coming together and innovating on the next big thing. But they really want gathering places, amenities, to have a reason to stay after work and meet up with other people in their fields. And they also see an affordable housing need. They're saying people just coming out of school are not being able to find places nearby to live. So some of the ideas we heard from you all last time we were here is the idea that transit really should be the priority in the area, and that knowing the challenges of single occupancy vehicles or private cars being the main way to get around here is really challenging. So shifting away from that and seeing how that can be supported. The street extensions, the 214th and 20th Ave, seem to be good ideas as long as they're tied to major improvements to transit, and that the 9th Ave improvements would come first before street extensions, and that public safety use or emergency vehicles would really be considered in how all of these improvements would be made, so that that really is prioritized. We've been meeting with something called an Interagency Transportation Advisory Committee. And so they have been giving us suggestions as well. And Carmen's going to talk more about BAT lanes, and she'll explain what those are. It's transit priority lanes. And then the idea of transit within the business park rather than on Bothell Everett Highway. So she's going to talk more about those ideas. And then something else that we heard was reducing parking requirements and really thinking about parking management strategies, kind of pre-thinking the problems that will happen as we're, again, evolving from a more car-oriented society to other modes. And then we'll talk more about this as well, but redefining level of service. And this is how we measure delay at intersections and along corridors, and how long you're waiting in your car or in your bus. And we'll talk more about this, but the idea of redefining that to be focused less on private vehicles and more on people, how much delay a person is experiencing rather than a single car, and other ideas like safety and just general functionality of the system. So that's a lot of information about what this preferred land use mix is and how it relates to transportation. As I mentioned earlier, we're really looking at the land use mix tonight, and land use mix and intensity. What are those colors on the map? Where are they? What do they mean? And then our next round will be more of what Carmen's talking about tonight, the next level of transportation analysis. Once we settle that land use mix, then looking at what those numbers mean for transportation and questions around some of the ideas that have come up later in the game, like bat lanes and parallel transit route. So I'll let Carmen take it from here.
Thanks, Rachel. Again, my name is Carmen Kwan. I work for Fair and Peers, and I led the transportation analysis for the sub-area. So starting at the beginning, talking about the traffic modeling, the total site trip generation for the proposed land use out to 2043, that calculation considered the demographic, socioeconomic, locational, and land use characteristics of Canyon Park. That considered the land use mix in the area, the density, and distance to transit. That type of information is what we use to generate the total PM peak hour trips for Canyon Park, and we layered that on top of the regional traffic forecast for the area to understand what kind of through trips are expected out in 2043 on the street network system. One additional modification that we did is for the mitigated live-work alternative. We made an assumption that travel demand management strategies would be a requirement for Canyon Park. And through various types of demand strategies, we reduced the vehicle trip generation by 14%, assuming policies would be in place to help encourage people to use multimodal travel and to discourage single occupancy vehicle travel to Canyon Park. Out to 2043, we're seeing for the mitigated live-work alternative an additional 6,500 new PM peak hour trips compared to existing condition. And the no action alternative would increase the PM peak hour trips by 4,000 in this area. So if we do nothing, we understand that there will be growth to this area. We know that traffic operations will worsen during peak conditions. And this just shows what kind of additional traffic we are expecting under this mitigated live-work alternative. The map on the right also shows some of the PM peak hour trips along various segments and streets around Canyon Park, and little text box show how certain areas, what the traffic increase is expected to be out to 2043 compared to existing conditions. For the DEIS, the traffic operations are evaluated by the level of service at each intersection. So this is the average vehicle delay in seconds a car experiences traveling through each of the intersections. Right now, the city has an LOS-E standard. The level of service can range from LOS-A to F, and these are the same grades that you would get in grade school, where A is free flow traffic and LOS-F is congested corridors with stop and go travel through. So you'll see on the left under no action, there are 2 corridors in Canyon Park that are expected to operate LOS-F and not meet the city's LOS-E standard. And that is Maltby Road, the east-west road in the north end, and Bothell Everett Highway running north-south. On the right, we have the traffic operations results for the 2043 mitigated live-work alternative. This includes the mitigation projects that Rachel had mentioned earlier, which are the new street extensions, travel demand management strategies applied to the area, as well as enhanced transit service. So under this mitigated live-work alternative and with the mitigation projects we propose, you'll see that the 524 and Bothell Everett Highway corridor are still expected to experience increased delay and operate LOS-F conditions. Leading up to the DEIS, this table just shows the numerous mitigation projects that we explored to try and manage the additional traffic that's expected to be generated with the proposed growth. So we were looking at new roundabouts instead of signals, new bat lanes, a new interchange on 405, grade separated projects to try and make the traffic operations flow better. What we've heard from numerous people have been that the grade separated projects are likely too costly for this area, and that widening roadways is not likely to help, considering if you start widening roadways, you're going to generate more demand, and you can't really build your way out of this congestion. Through conversations with the ITAC and the Planning Commission, we have heard, though, that there is a desire for more transit-oriented projects for the sub-area to help improve transit access in and out of the area. So we will be looking at various bat lane concepts or business access and transit lanes. So an example here up in this figure shows how buses will be able to use the outside lane as well as right turning general purpose traffic. More creative ideas that we've heard from the transportation agency has been considering peak reversible center bat lanes if we aren't able to widen SR 527. And that is something that we will be considering and looking at the next couple months. The last suggestion in terms of transit improvements for the area was actually a parallel transit route to Bothell Everett Highway. So on the map here, you can see in the thick red line, a potential new transit corridor within Canyon Park that would improve transit speed and reliability by taking them off the congested Bothell Everett Highway corridor. So what we'll be looking at is to see if this type of parallel transit route is put in place. Is it actually, how much faster is it going to be for transit compared to Bothell Everett Highway? What are the land use implications by constructing this type of corridor? And what kind of impact this will have on the internal streets? Once we get the approved land use mix to evaluate, we will also be taking a closer look at the internal street network of Canyon Park and how will that be affected by the proposed growth. Great, so I'm going to hand this back to Rachel. Oh, Bruce.
So a lot of information presented really quickly, the result of 3 years of work and maybe more from that. Right now, we want to provide an opportunity for the commission to ask us any questions, if you've had any clarifying questions you'd like to have, as well as we want to open it up to the public comment. And of course, we'll do the usual 3 minutes and I'll work the timer. But if you have any questions as staff and the consultant team, we'd be happy to hear them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Rachel and Bruce. Yeah, this is time in the meeting to ask clarifying questions on anything you've heard from any of the 4 people who spoke.
One quick question. Early in the presentation, you had mentioned that all federal funding comes through the Puget Sound Regional Growth Council. Is there no other ways for public funding except for that entity?
Well, actually, there are many funding mechanisms. That is the biggest pot, usually. That is the one that...
For federal funding?
Yeah.
Okay.
Federal funding usually has to go through a transportation agency, and Puget Sound Regional Council is that designated transportation agency for our region.
So for federal funds, that's the only way we can get them?
I don't want to say it's the only way, because there are some others, but it's the majority of funds come through that, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Commissioner Wilson.
Hi, I was going to ask, how difficult is it to enforce like requiring Orca cards at businesses in Canyon Park? Like, is there a big barrier to that, or is it just the council says we want to do this and they make it part of the code? Like, how does that work?
Okay, anyway, we're making sure we coordinate on our responses. Here's what we do. We actually have that program in place right now. And essentially what it is it involves the city, CTR, Commute Trip Reduction Coordinator, to go out and work with the businesses. We also use community transit. Community transit has a really good program where they actually go out and encourage that. One of the things we found very interesting was that the companies, the businesses, I should say, are very interested in this type of a program, and some of them have already implemented it very, really in depth, and so they actually are doing that now. But we also, of course, it is a state law provision that we can enforce it, but most of them have a very great vested interest in doing it anyway.
And just to add to that, I don't know that the city can require them to provide Orca cards free of charge. But they are required, as Bruce was saying, under state law, the Commute Trip Reduction Act. There's a menu of things that they can do. They can choose from that how they reduce the commute trips to their particular business. So that's one of the options that they can do to demonstrate that they're mitigating their traffic impacts. But it's not necessarily something that the city can specifically require them to do.
It's also worth noting that the CTR program only applies to employers with more than 100 employees arriving during peak hours.
That's correct.
Commissioner Curd?
I had a clarifying question on the connections to 9th Avenue Southeast. Is the 219th connection no longer proposed, or that wasn't presented on the slides, but it's in the packet?
I'm sorry, it is suggested to propose. We had some issues with some of the slide things, but it is still suggested for consideration.
Thank you.
A quick question for Carmen. So on the slide where you had the projected traffic or level of services between no action and the action we're looking at putting into place, I noticed eastbound on 228th, the level of service gets better. I'm just trying to wrap my mind, I mean, that's a good thing. That's great. I'm just in my mind trying to having driven that road many times, trying to understand better how level of service goes down if we're including all these new employees and or residents.
That's a great question. Something that's not clearly identified in the right map for the mitigated live-work alternative is that it includes all the transportation improvement projects that we had brought to the table. So for 228th Street on the east side, that assumes the widening of 228th from the 3 lanes today to 5 lanes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's not included in the no action scenario on the left.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
One of the comments in the letter provided from Van Ness Feldman, number 6, indicates the no action alternative assumes the city will not make any transportation improvements. Is that in fact true?
Actually, that's not a complete, accurate reflection of what our analysis showed.
Okay, so there would be...
And we actually showed the one map that showed a number of improvements that are already in our comp plan that we were...
Under no action.
Doing. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that.
Any other questions, clarifications from commissioners? I'm sure you'll think of things later in discussion, but we'll go ahead and then open up to public testimony. So anybody who wants to, I have 3 names here. So anybody who wants to speak to this topic this evening, please come forward and state your name and address for the record, and please do hold your comments and to 3 minutes.
And I will have the little measuring device that basically gives people 3 minutes. When it turns yellow, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, so first we have additional people. Okay, we'll go with the first one I got. Okay, so we have a Paul Young.
Good evening. I'm Paul Young, 216th Avenue. And so one of my concerns, several of the concerns I have, is, again, safety. We've talked about widening 9th Avenue, doing better access. Concern I have is that you've got schools, you've got property, you've got a freeway overpass that is going to limit the size of the road and the access, bike paths, whatever you're going to put in there. But it's interesting that we're talking about widening that road, but we're opposed to widening the Bothell-Everett Highway. The excuse we have is that you can't build your way out of the situation, but it seems that we're trying to build our way out of a situation by running it through residential. Concern that we have is that safety of the kids, safety of the community. I think a lot of people looked at the PM rush hour. I don't think anybody's looked at the AM rush hour. And that we have that school starts right about the rush hour time, school gets out right about the rush hour time, and I don't think they've done enough impact to see what we've got from there. Talked about not being able to go through wetlands, but it seems that all along 214th is wetland on both sides. We don't seem to have a problem plowing through that, but we have a problem with plowing. We don't have a problem with going behind Fred Meyer. And extending that street for people to leave the business park that's there. Other suggestions that has been brought up is, anybody done a study on where people are traveling from versus actually people that work here? We had a nice slide that showed everybody that worked here, worked in the region, but as anybody knows, that people will come off of 405 and they go up the Bothell-Everett Highway. They don't actually live and work here. They're transiting from somewhere else up to Mill Creek, beyond Everett, or somewhere else in, Seattle Hill. I've never heard anybody do any studies in terms of that impact and where they're coming from, and how we're going to mitigate from there. Those are just some of the big concerns that I've got that I haven't seen anybody address yet. We'll go from there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Ginger Young? What he said? Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, do you please come? Yes, please. Thank you very much.
I was wondering about somebody made a comment, and we had some slides on increasing the work area as well as residential area. So like working on the ground floor and then residential upward 2-3 floors. And then the impact on the community itself with influx of people. We already had 5,000 new homes built, I believe, in the last year and a half in the Bothell, Snohomish, King County area. But then I'm also thinking the median price of a home in our community already is close to $500,000. And so I'm wondering how we can encourage new businesses to come in and encourage their people to move here and it still be affordable for them to live here. Have we done a study on that, on the impact of the cost of living in the area? And that's about it. Other than that, he covered it.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Roger Belenich.
Members of the Planning Commission, it's hard in 3 minutes to cover 42 years that I've been working in Bothell. I first developed Canyon Park Shopping Center. It opened in 1980. I developed the Canyon Park Business Center and a lot of the retail. I want to call your attention in my haste to the letter I wrote to Bruce Blackburn identifying the property I own on the southwest quadrant of Bothell Highway and 405. A very high identity property, a very significant property. It's now developed in low use retail. In order to redevelop that property and meet the mitigations of storm water and parking, I strongly recommend that it be classified not in medium density, but in high density. If that's correct description, Bruce, 100 feet. It would require tearing those buildings down. And I don't envision this for the next 10 years, but this area is in the path of growth as demonstrated in the analysis of the business park itself. But I think that property of mine, in order to be redeveloped, will have to go up in the air to provide the parking, and who knows how net it will be when you deal with stormwater under your new manual, which is going to require vaults. Please consider that. This plan that you're working on now is operative for a long time. So we must get on the plan now in order for the redevelopment in 10 years. Once it's on the plan, you don't have an opportunity in development to come in and say it should go to 100 feet if that's the feasibility of it. This plan is operative for a long time, and I've changed the Canyon Park Business Center in 1982 in Snohomish County. I know how this game works, and I've developed a lot of the retail on the Bothell Highway from Thrasher's Corner to 228th. So, and I also think, Bruce, I call your attention because I've had conversations, and I'm on the board of the Canyon Park Business Center, and as we point out in our appeal, there's a lot of reconciliation that has to be done per your plan in stormwater and particularly traffic, and these haven't been addressed, and we haven't had a response. But I'm here today as an owner of property, and I think all the property between North Creek and Bothell Highway, in other words, that one northeast.
We're 30 minutes or 30 seconds over your time. Could you wrap it up if you could? I am sorry. We have gotten your letter, and,
I
appreciate it.
So
just
I
have to give equal time.
Particular property where the north part of 220th should be high density also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belovich.
It's hard to get into this after all my years without extrapolating.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol Zada.
My name's Carol Zada. I live on 9th Avenue, and my one question now has to do with, it's actually kind of brought up in this letter, and she asked about 217th to 9th Avenue, and I have not seen that on any of the maps or been able to question it. It would solve two problems at the same time. It would allow you to just put a bike path or a walk path on 214th, but it would also solve the problem for Phillips. They would have access to 9th Avenue. You wouldn't have to do two different projects, you just do one. And it's already set up, the fire department is on that road already. And I just haven't heard why that hasn't been proposed.
Oh.
That's it. And
Okay.
I don't know if somebody has an answer for it, if I could ask Bruce.
Sorry, and could you clarify just a clarification? Which, you said two projects?
Well, there's two projects. You're
right.
looking at 214th and 219th.
Got it.
And have access. And one is for Phillips, so they have access for their employees to leave. And the other is 214th, which there's a lot of opposition to that. And in this letter by Cheryl, who was she represents, what is it, I don't know what her title is, but she made a comment in here about 217th and why that couldn't be accessed. And I've just not heard during the meetings that I've been to, I haven't heard anybody address it. And I have no idea why that's not an option. And if I can I ask someone to answer that? I mean, Bruce, do you have a reason for it?
Staff can respond to that when the
Yeah, that'd be
committee
great.
is deliberating, if
Okay.
it's okay.
So we'll go ahead and, thank you very much. Thank you. H. Galen Smith?
Thank you. I'm Galen Smith. I live on 9th Avenue. I've lived there for quite a while, and I've come to appreciate the wildlife that surrounds me. And what I'm seeing and hearing tonight is that the Planning Commission, or I should say the people that have conducted the study, are focused on bringing all these people to one area. I'm to tell you that that's not the whole story that you'll be dealing with in years to come. People are transmitting through the area, going to Bellevue, going to Linwood, going to Everett. They're going through our area. They're not just coming here to work in Bothell. They're getting through, moving through. And what you've done and what we have done is contain them with our red lights, with our minimum streets, and all the other things that inhibit traffic. And not only that, the proposal that we're looking at here is going to destroy the life that we have come to appreciate. We have reserves of animal life, fish, birds. Are you going to see them in 2045? With what you're proposing here, I think not. Think about it. It is a big effort that we've got to undertake and understand what our actions are going to be. What I've heard tonight is let's build high. I can't see a 45-year-old person riding a bicycle for 45 minutes to get to work. Can you? Do you? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Jim Gow? I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing anybody's names. Can't.
Yeah, hi, good evening, City Council member and Bruce and the Develop Committee. So I'm the owner of 9th Avenue Southeast. My comments just echo my neighbor Roger Blanche. I live in Vancouver, Canada for 10 years. I'm living here for 10 years. So what happened is because our here intention is bring our GTC, like a regional growth area, like bring more residents to this area. So it's a golden opportunity to really take advantage of the park and ride. Because in Canada, like in Vancouver especially, like people really take a public transit. I think in Seattle, Greater Seattle, like public transit really is not the mainstream yet. But if we build the residential mixed a little bit higher, like not really high, like 30 or 50 floors, but like 20 or 15 floors, like by building high, that really hopefully can reduce the, make it affordable. So like people working here can, like that have kids, they can have live very close walking distance to their job and to the public transit. That's what my thought. Also, I really like the idea develop the neighborhood center street, the walking path, and the scooter and the bicycle. That really make the interconnect by people who live close by, walking here. So that make it really friendly to neighborhood, reduce the automobile traffic. That's my comment. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Phil Waite. I guess Phil is not with us. Okay. That is everybody who signed up. Oh, it looks like there's somebody else in the audience. You'd like to please state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Sarah Gustafson, and I am actually a resident of Norway Hill. We have a bus stop close to our neighborhood that one day might see similar developments to what's going on here, so I'm particularly interested. I'd like to thank Mr. Blackburn, Ms. Kwan, and Ms. Miller for organizing a wonderful workshop in January on Canyon Park connections. There were maps, there were stickers, and there were neighbors. So this was a great way to hear from fellow residents. And some residents did express interest in balancing new jobs with new homes for people who will take on these jobs. I really like the focus on transit improvements as well as dedicated pedestrian paths and through block connections. And when we're talking about balance, I agree with Mr. Smith that one really, really important thing to focus on is the balance between the natural and the human environment. I'm guessing that the environmental impacts do not fall into the scope of our current discussion, but it is something crucial to focus on. I think the original study that I read said that perhaps the mitigated live-work alternative might actually improve habitat for fish and birds, partly by increasing stormwater absorption. I'd really like to hear some more discussion about that. I also read that the study had some questions about beaver habitat, for example. The beavers might not do as well as the fish and birds in this situation. So whenever there is a change proposed, I hope that we can look at ways to not only mitigate the changes of development, but to also bring a net benefit to wildlife. And there were a lot of ways in the study to do that. For example, hardscape changes, plantscape changes, and even stewardship. And I'd really like there to be a lot of focus as much as possible on those concerns that Mr. Smith brought up when considering these alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who, okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrea Jackson. So I'm a resident that lives off of 214th Street. And so, hi, I appreciate the forums that have been held already. The question that I have is that in this document, there's been a lot of opposition to expanding 214th all the way through to 9th. And that came out in every facility. And I have to say, I'm calculating if this happens in 2043, if I'll still live here. Maybe I'll be in a nursing home somewhere and it won't matter. But if so, I'm moving. But the question that I have is in the document, in these documents, Bruce and team, I'm not clear. On page 20, it says this is a potential mitigation, but then in others, like on this slide, it shows the green as immediate pedestrian improvement. So I'm confused. Is it in or out? With 214th. That's really, and I would encourage that. I mean, there's just a lot of safety issues to be concerned, but I'm not clear on that. So if I could get an answer to that, that would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely will be discussing that later tonight. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak to this? Okay. Well, with that, we will go ahead and allow commissioners to ask questions of staff or the consultants that are here tonight. So if anybody has any questions, not just clarifications, but anything else you'd like to ask with regards to what you've heard, what you've read, let's kind of start from there, and then we can kind of maybe make our way through some of the pages that we were given. Check out. Commissioner Olson?
How did you know? So I had a question related to Mr. Bellanish's comment. Let's say it's 20 years from now and Canyon Park is flourishing and like that lot or one of the medium lots wants to be rezoned as a high capacity mixed use. Like what would that look like? Can that be done? You know, is it crazy difficult or is it something that could sort of easily be done with some work?
Apologies, I was finding the slide. We do have a process in place that allows people to come in and ask for a comp plan amendment. And basically it's kind of like a rezone, but we use it as a comp plan amendment. And it's a tough, long-term type of a process that really requires somebody to put a lot of time and effort into it. But we do have that as availability that somebody can submit in any particular given year to request a change to their land.
Thank you. Sorry, still getting used to the mic.
No other questions or this time? Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
At the chair's discretion, if you'd like, we can respond to the two questions I heard from the people who testified tonight, if you'd like us to address those.
I would. That'd be great. If you could, yeah, we'll just go ahead and address that at this time. It'd be great.
So I think the first one I heard was regarding 217th and whether that was, am I getting the right one here? Or why I'm sorry, why 217th wasn't talked about. So I think I would ask, I don't know who on the team would be the best one to address that, but it is in the draft. So
is it
219th?
Or 219th, I'm sorry. The one behind Phillips. You want to address
And then that's 219th place, right?
Actually, I think the speaker was speaking about the road that's just north of there. There's a road that is essentially just north of the fire station. That's kind of hard to see up there. And I know one of the things that we actually did, we actually looked at that as a possible mitigation option. The problem is that it would have to be right in and right out only at that point, which is feasible, I guess, but we kind of already have that. If you were to add some type of a crossing or left turn movements, it would involve a traffic signal. And as I recall, and Carmen is going to correct me because I'm sure I'll get that wrong, it really did create a lot more delay on the Buffalo Everett Highway. We looked at too many things, I think.
When we were looking at street extensions, there were a lot of different options that we were looking at through the sub area. 217th was brought up at one point, and I think the concern was the close proximity to the 220th Street signal to the south and how that 217th signal could operate with those two so closely together. That's why the proposal was shifted north to the 214th Street connection between Bothell Everett Highway and 9th Avenue.
Any follow-up questions to that?
Commissioner Cabe.
I'm guessing one of the major concerns is if it was a right turn entrance and right turn exit, there'd be a lot of turnaround traffic further down 9th. If they wanted to take a left, they'd want to do a U-turn and come back the other way. Did you guys look at any ways to mitigate that potential pitfall? As far as a light or not that we have room for a roundabout, but just any other ways of trying to get someone to turn left off some of these cut-throughs that we're looking at?
Sorry, just clarification. I'm not sure I fully understood the what part you're asking about there. Would it be you're talking about people turning right onto 217th? And then turning around to come back?
From what Bruce mentioned, it sounded like it was a right on 9th also, right? Or is that incorrect?
No, it was basically, we were trying to look at the operation effects it had on the Bothell Everett Highway.
Okay.
And that was a real concern because right now people turn left into 217th from the Bothell Everett Highway. It's not a very safe move.
No, not at all.
But Carmen she did the, okay, there she goes.
Yes. I can see your question is about the connection to 9th Avenue. So for these street extensions, we are assuming some sort of new intersection control at 9th Avenue. It would likely be a traffic signal, and that would allow left and right turns onto 9th Avenue.
Okay, perfect.
And with regards to that, at the hearings and the meetings, it appears that you heard a lot of the neighbors in that area, a lot of the discussion was in opposition. Is that true to that particular road going through to 9th? Okay. That's okay. Commissioner Olson.
I did have a question about some of the comments about wetlands on 214th. Is it safe to assume that you reviewed those wetlands and like the position of a road before proposing it? Like that's been looked at, there's more details. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that, that concern was raised a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll give him my response verbally so you know what it's doing other than shaking my head. That was actually something that we were looked at. In fact, our wetland consultant, who's not here today, we use in Watershed, they basically have gone out and taken a look at some of those areas. And one of the challenges is going to be trying to find the location that has the least impact, because anything the city does would have to be mitigated for, just like any other development activity goes. So if we were to have an impact upon a wetland buffer, we have to come up with mitigation scenarios that function for that. And we have to go right up to the state agencies and the feds and all those kind of things, just like anybody else does.
Thank you.
And I think that's an important point that Bruce just mentioned, is that these are not precise alignments for these when we're talking about extending roadways. We're approximating where we think that would go. Obviously, there'd be a lot more work that would have to be done, even beyond what we're going to do in the sub-area plan before that could actually be built. The other question, and I'll see if I can get this one right.
Okay.
Was from Ms. Jackson, and that was about 114th.
214th?
See, I messed up already. 214th.
Okay.
Yes, 214th, sorry. And I think we've talked about that in two contexts. One being an extension of that street over to 9th as a full street traffic, all vehicles. And then the other being as just some sort of maybe a pedestrian bicycle connection. So I think that was the question, is which is it? Is it in or out? And I'll defer to the team who obviously knows more about this than I do.
You want to do it?
Or is it something that you're looking to the commission to decide on later from what you've given us to what we'd recommend or amend with regards to what you've given us?
Yeah.
Well, yes, certainly the commission direction on this is going to be really important as we go through. One of the things that I want to identify is that right now we're trying not to reduce the possibilities. We want to look at all of those things, and that's an important factor that we consider as we go through the entire fleet. There is very logical, and it makes a lot of sense that there may be some areas where we say, look, we're just not going to do this because of some impact or another, and we're just starting that investigation of what their feasibility is. Right now, it's in because we want to continue to study these as options.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Hampton.
Thanks. This is a really great share out today. Thank you so much for the comprehensive report. I made a couple of notes in the packet here and a few things that I didn't see covered in the packet, but they were covered in the presentation, so I was happy to see that. But first I had a question about the bullet that reads, encourage office uses adjacent to air quality impacted and high noise areas. We talked about this last, the February 19th study session quite a bit. And I noticed that the zoning was for office/residential mixed use, but we had indicated, or at least I had indicated last time, that I thought that office use around that area would be a good idea. And we had conversations about not necessarily wanting to dictate what that use would be, but we also heard from staff that the zoning with residential or office as an option would probably or likely lead to residential use. So is that something that we're going to address, or could we address that if the other commissioners thought that that was something that should be dealt with?
Yes and yes. Basically, the concept is that we heard that, and we wanted to note that we heard that, but we weren't sure we had full consensus of the commission on that. So it's one of those things we want to talk about during your deliberations, is what would make sense there and what mechanism. If you identify, look, we want to have some type of a setback or a distance or some other type of a mitigating measure, we will work to resolve that for you.
Thanks, Bruce.
I have a couple other things, but is now a good time for a discussion on that, or would you rather?
I think so, because honestly, I might forget about it if we continue on other topics.
I'd like to hear from other commissioners on this.
So, with regards to the buffering, Commissioner Kiernan.
Well, I think at the last meeting, I did speak in favor of the office closer to the freeway with the residential further away.
Does anybody else? Oh, Commissioner Cabe.
I think last time, Commissioner Hampton, you brought up the fact that this might be a spot zone if we're just looking at it for this one specific stretch, as opposed to a policy that kind of extends all along the freeway and has it interjects with Bothell. Is that one of your concerns still, or?
So I think, we're confusing maybe two different issues. There was a thought that we would do this because it was a high noise, high or low air quality zone, but I'm just outright suggesting that we could zone this as office high or high office use and not allow residential there. There's another bullet here that says the city should be patient and wait for the preferred land uses. And if office doesn't necessarily pencil out there now, it will eventually. And so it would be worth waiting to ensure that we were able to get that use there. But to your point about the spot zoning question, I wasn't in favor of that for this area, but I think outright just zoning it office would make sense to me.
I'm in agreement with kind of looking at an office zone for that area. I think I brought it up last time, but we've tried to encourage office development other places in Bothell, and it just hasn't happened yet. So I'm in favor of that.
Commissioner Peiser.
If we're going to limit it to office, which it's fine, are we looking to kick it up to high or keep it at medium? Because right now it looks like my colors are correct. That spot in the southwest corner, right now it says medium office residential, correct?
Sorry, I think we're talking about the other side of the freeway near the park and ride, the brighter coral color.
Oh, I was looking at the light pink too.
I was looking at on the southwest side. Sorry.
So what are you talking about, Commissioner Hampton?
So
South what side?
I believe at the February 19th meeting, we were talking about the area in proximity to 17th and the park and ride, which will be served by the BRT and the Swift lines. Due to the transit investments, it made more sense to have the office there. But I guess I'd look to staff or the consultants for clarification on that.
So you're talking about the areas immediately north of the park and ride.
So the discussion we had last meeting was that it really is around air quality and noise issues. And the air quality guidance that we've been seeing more and more of is that a buffer of about 500 feet seems to be a safer zone, and using that 500 feet to just be a safe area, using air conditioning and things like that within that area. So in our mind, the office designation works both north and south within about 500 feet of I-405. And one of our questions for you all is if you don't like the 500-foot buffer idea where office only would be allowed there and residential beyond that, what is the extent of the office-only zone?
So I think with that, I don't know if I can answer your question fully here, but to Commissioner Peastrup's question, I wouldn't propose changing the density, merely changing the use there, though I don't know if it makes as much sense on the kind of the southwest side of 405 as it does on the northeast side, though I would be open to studying that further. I was always envisioning the area near the park and ride because of the BRT and Swift Line investments.
Okay, so to be clear, so right now we're talking about the northeast side and north of the park and ride, that dark pink.
I think they're proposing a 500-foot buffer, which would mean it would be on both sides. And so I think the question for us is whether we would support that on all sides, a 500-foot buffer, or if we would want to kind of get the Sharpie out and draw where we wanted this office at. Is that right?
Commissioner Curd, did you have a question?
Mr. Blackburn, you can respond.
No.
Oh,
Okay. So I've given it a lot of thought these past couple of weeks, and I was the one who originally brought up some of the concerns about environmental impacts of living near roadways and impacts to humans in contact with cars. I think that this area we're really trying to focus in as a place where the community is coming together with these yellow, plaza and community gathering space improvements. And I don't think that those can really be successful in a pure office setting. I think my vision and what I've heard from the community is that Canyon Park right now is fairly restricted to a daytime use only. And so encouraging, more uses around the clock could be part of what we're looking for in terms of creating a space that's more people friendly. And so I think I'd be more opposed to just crossing residential out of this entire area, especially because that residential needs to be placed elsewhere in the sub area. And if I was looking to have an apartment close to work, I'd be looking for something that's close to the park and ride so I can access that, and I'd be looking for something that's centrally located. So I think that area itself is really conducive to residential uses, and I just don't want to cross that off the books and just call it office right now, despite the impacts to health.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson?
I agree with Commissioner Curd. I don't see a lot of other good zones in the sub area for that kind of high density residential. And I think being close to the park and ride is going to be important to the kind of people that we sort of envision living in these spaces. So I just wanted to say that I agree with that.
Commissioner Hampton?
I think both points by Commissioner Olson and Commissioner Curd are well taken. I think it would be great to pull up the map that shows the walk shed, because 500 feet doesn't come close to enveloping all of those areas. We would still have quite a bit of room for mixed use residential. And the fear here is that we lose our opportunity for high density office because it's so attractive to build mixed use residential right now. And it's penciling out for people. And so that's the concern that I'm trying to address by this.
Yeah, just for some scale, if you do have the packet map open, it does have the scale at the bottom, and you can look at how much 500 feet is. But it kind of aligns with this yellow line here. So the part north of about where I'm drawing with the mouse would be about 500 feet. And then in the northern area, this entire east-west street would be outside of that 500 feet for sure. And the park and ride and just about here would be about in that 500 feet. So it's not the whole zone. There'd be a lot of flexibility.
And to be clear, we're talking about 500 feet from 405, Correct. Thank you.
Actually, at least point of clarification, is that from 405 and the access ramps as well, or just the main lines and CDs?
It's probably easier to read it from the right.
The right of way, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think so. What I'm hearing up here is a bit of a split on how people are feeling. Is there anything that says if like for instance, if, I guess this is a question for me, if one wants to build office or residential, let's say somebody wants to do mixed use residential, is it very common out there in the marketplace to require an office component? If we're really trying to get office, I don't know if they really go together very well, but.
Well, the beauty of this discussion is that we can establish a preferred alternative land use, but we have sub-area plan regulations and policies we're going to be talking about too. So if the commission wants to just for us to explore this, we'll come back with some more options for them as we start going through the sub-area plan planning process. Oh, Lisa's got a request.
Just wanted to talk a little bit about an example to the south, the Kirkland Urban Project. The city had been seeing a lot of mixed-use residential in its downtown, and it was trying to hold out in the Park Place or Kirkland Urban area for jobs, and it took a while, but they eventually got that mix that they were seeking, retail and tech downtown.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess, Commissioner Curd.
I think I'm the one that's opposing this the most. I would be, I guess, willing to compromise on residential areas near the park and ride if there was additional density elsewhere in the sub area. And I see maybe over time this has changed, but the medium residential capacity near 228th and the existing QFC area was that used to be, we were having discussions where it was more high use. Is that just a change due to the stepping down towards the residential areas, or what was the concern with moving that away from high? 228th near the existing QFC development.
Yeah, there was a strong component here to take advantage of that transit, and the transit is a little bit north of there. Talking about the southern portion, just south of 228th Street, where the QFC and the Chick-fil-A and those type of developments are. We did do a little change there. We went to residential mixed-use medium.
Yeah, and the development feasibility typologies that we looked at were really based on how close you were to transit and how much you could reduce parking, basically. So that's really what drove the development types and the higher density versus medium versus lower.
I'm wondering if maybe the improvements to these like Main Street areas and community plazas wouldn't help with the, access to the park and ride area. Mm-hmm. I'm also just in thinking about all of this too, when Swift eventually works its way to downtown Bothell, is the park and ride even going to be on the route? It is? Okay. Because I'm not sure, the whole focus is that the park and ride is an immovable object here. And that's what we've been operating under the assumption, but it's difficult because it's in this, in the path of 405, and it's creating challenges in terms of, public health.
Commissioner Gabe.
So would that transfer points remain there? Yeah. Yeah. I was asking Carmen if she knew anything further about the Green Line transfer point to the I-405 BRT. It would make sense that that transfer point should remain. So I was curious if she knew anything further about if that stayed right there at the park and ride and the flyover stop.
Thanks.
So if we can't get to a strict zoning designation, if we're kind of split on this, I'd rather we focus on incentivizing what we want there. So either, give them extra bonuses for height if they go with office, or on the flip side, if we're looking at residential, put a larger requirement on affordable housing, which might kill two birds with one stone. I think we should look at those options as opposed to maybe a strict designation.
I would support looking into that. Commissioner Kiernan.
So I believe I heard a reference tonight about encouraging an additional park and ride in the Canyon Park Place area. Is that correct? So would that then change the calculation and move that into more of a high density? Since we seem to be driving the high density due to proximity to the park and ride. If there were an additional park and ride, would that provide more space for more high density?
Are you talking about beyond the high density that we're showing there already?
Yes, it seems to me, and I think I heard, that the high density is driven by the walkability to the transit hub. So if the intent is to pursue an additional transit hub in the Canyon Park Place area, which I would assume a park and ride is, would that then give the opportunity to drive more density there?
So the purpose behind the park and ride south of I-405 in the PCC area would be, as this neighborhood is still a more car-oriented area, it provides the opportunity to access transit, still using their car, and get on I-405 or Green Line. But it also intercepts people that otherwise might drive along Bothell Everett Highway and congest the area further. So the park and ride is just kind of a stopgap while people are still using cars more than other ways before transit can actually get them to this transfer point more easily. And ideally, it would actually be kind of a flexible building that could convert to something else so that you could still get the really high density on that land in the future.
So if I'm understanding your question, Commissioner Kiernan, it sounds like the assumption under that would be that the park and ride south of 405 in the Canyon Park Place would also be a transit hub. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case that we're talking about here. I think the transit hub would still be in the flyover stop in the middle of 405, and this would be another way for, another area for people to park and get to that, that particular stop. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what I think I'm hearing from the commission, and I've messed up just about everything else tonight, so tell me if I missed this one, is that you want us to take a look at some different scenarios there in terms of, are there incentives that we can put in place? I think I'm hearing still look at maybe just a straight zoning for office there. Or
And if so, maybe more residential somewhere else along.
Right, look at how we sort of squeeze the balloon, if you will, and where it might, pop out to. But still exploring that, but generally you're okay with the mix and the intensity that we have there. We're just trying to fine tune that area either side of the freeway within about 500 feet. Is that a fair statement?
I see some nodding of heads.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Okay,
And I would
great,
also
thank you.
support Commissioner Curd's proposal to add, to make up for the loss of the high-density housing in other areas. I mean, we had a petitioner here tonight, a member of the public, that was talking about potential for a higher use over near the Hilton. And then Commissioner Curd's comment about the QFC area, I think that's well taken. And with Swift Line connecting to that, by the time we get, 2040, long time in the future, that's a, two-seat trip to Bellevue or Linwood or other job centers in the area on frequent headways, so that wouldn't be a bad idea.
And I'd also like to, if I could add on to that too, Michael, that was a good synopsis of it, much better than I could have done, is that on Commissioner Cabe's point with regards to affordable housing, we may get to it here, it's getting late already, but I was kind of unexcited about the numbers that were proposed. They seem kind of on the low side for if we're going to have, this density there. I feel like we're already reducing parking requirements and such, that it just seems like we should be able to get to a little bit higher of affordability component for all the workers that are going to be, hopefully, maybe not having to, maybe they can walk home or bike home from there, that are doing more of the blue collar jobs that are going to be needed to support this area rather than, I know we're going to have transit there, but I'd like to get a little bit more of an affordability component. So.
And that is certainly one of the key objectives of the sub-area plan, and we'll be looking at that in more detail as we go through this to see how we can leverage as much as possible in terms of affordable housing.
Great.
Well, that was my first comment. The rest should go faster. I just want to point out a couple of things in the memo that I wanted to emphasize. The considering transit as the go-to commute option for the future, I fully support that. Exploring allowing high occupant vehicles in BAT lanes. I have more concerns with that than support for it. We want to keep our transit moving, and as we've seen on other corridors, when we add carpools to those carpool lanes, that sounds funny, right? But to the lanes, when there are two or more, they get congested. It seems to work pretty well on 405 with the tolling and making it 3+ for free, but it would be really hard to kind of activate that on Bothelor Highway with all of the intersections and people being able to turn right and allowing right turns and not being able to control who's in there as an HOV. So I would say no, just keep it as a standard BAT lane. As far as the comment here with additional capacity on 527 would be filled up quickly with new background traffic, I think that is spot on, and for that reason, and for other reasons that we've heard here, I don't know that we should consider widening 9th unless it was a mitigation. And with that mitigation, it would first need to have a really great treatment of 9th with sidewalks, street trees, bike lanes to help calm that traffic. But I wouldn't rule out widening 9th if it helped get more people through the 527 corridor more efficiently and led to greater opportunities for transit there. A few things that I didn't see in the memo, but I saw in the slides. I was happy to see the BAT lane, the parallel transit route mentioned in there. We didn't really talk much about that today, but one of the things I'd like to see with that is, dedicated lanes or queue jumps or something to ensure that didn't get bogged down in traffic coming and leaving the office park. We saw a bullet about reduced parking requirements. I think that's definitely a way to incentivize better development, and like we said, transit and bicycling and walking are the wave of the future. And Mr. Smith did ask about a 45-year-old biking 45 minutes. I'm pretty close to 45, and I bike to the International District on a regular basis for work, so I know it can be done. That's about 90 minutes each way. And then
I did it at 60.
There's two of us there. Redefining the level of service to be less focused on private vehicles, I support that. Really should be about getting people to the places they want to go and not cars to the places they want to go. And then I want to point out, I read this week, we talk about electric cars being the future. 25% of our power in this region comes from coal or gas. So if we're talking about shifting people to cleaner transportation, it's not necessarily a car unless we solve that problem as well. It's off topic somewhat, but last week we talked about cleaner ways for cars to get around. So other than that, with the park and ride at Canyon Park that you were talking about near the PCC, would what you're proposing be something like a wraparound parking or the Texas wrap, where you build on the outside of the development the parking, and then at a later date when you don't need it, you're able to tear it down and redevelop that? Or would it be a structure that was more easily converted to another use, or is it not that specific? I'm just curious.
So at this level, it would just be guidance that it would need to be an adaptable building, and then that would be worked through a developer agreement or public-private partnership or something like that.
Okay. That's all of my comments, kind of bulleted down. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Hampton. Just to clarify, so on the 9th Avenue, you were saying you would not necessarily be in favor of widening it because it's just going to encourage more people to be driving, and it's not going to solve the issue. Was that right? Potentially? And then I was just trying to...
Yes, I think that if we're working with the assumption that we can't build our way out of this, I mean, the point was well made that by expanding roadways, we're not going to solve the problem. So let's not throw resources at it and then affect somebody's quality of life and what they like in their neighborhood. If it's not going to fix the problem, let's focus on what the real problem is. And that's that the last 50 years or more, we've been building communities that were focused around driving everywhere we go, and that didn't work. And so we're here now trying to fix that, and we shouldn't fix it by throwing old strategies that didn't work at future strategies that should work.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I just wanted to say that I'm in agreement with that. Especially, I think there's a lot of things that have to do with 9th before, and we had, I think, the Youngs speaking with regards to the kids and safety. We definitely need to slow down the speeds there quite a bit. Also, if we're thinking about doing it before we kind of throw a lot of money at it, sidewalks, widening of roads, because I feel like we've heard from a lot of people here. So I'm open to that. Commissioner Kiernan.
Well, 9th Avenue is an arterial. I think that's a reality. A lot of traffic goes through there, and kids shouldn't be playing in the street. It's an arterial with traffic going through. It has some significant needs. The discontinuous sidewalks, the lack of bicycle lane. There's a whole lot of stuff that should be done, but I think we need to recognize that it is an arterial that carries traffic and will continue to carry traffic.
And I guess the question is whether do you expand the traffic component or do you fix the sidewalks and the bike lanes and such? So those are two different things, but it's something we may want to consider as we move forward.
It's two different things, but there are a lot of improvements that need to come to 9th regardless, and I think some of those do include some capacity.
Sure.
If you look at turn lanes, look at traffic signalization, 9th will be improved, or should be improved.
Commissioner Olson.
Thanks.
Sorry, Bruce, I'll get back to you. Sorry.
I wanted to echo some of what Commissioner Hampton said. First, around the carpools in the bat lanes. At the Canyon Park, specifically the 9th and 214th open house, I got to speak to the Bothell police officers that were there. And one of the things that came up was sort of the freestyle use at 228th and Bothell Highway that doesn't always conforming to the law. And the challenge they expressed to me was that where are you going to pull people over when they, get creative with what a red light means and all that stuff. And just the enforcement is a big challenge there. And I don't think that it could be enforced if we allowed that use. I think it makes a lot more sense if a car's in there and it doesn't make a right turn. Okay, something's wrong. Like if we try to get to enforcing carpool, I think BPD would likely say that that's almost impossible. So I just wanted to add that note. And then the other thing is on 9th. It is an arterial, but I would love to see it improved to expand the capacity of bikers, cyclists is the word I'm looking for, and pedestrians. I think it can move people and it can be a safer route for people who aren't driving. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm in general agreement that I don't think 9th is our solution for moving traffic. I understand that's a very congested section of on Bothell Everett Highway. But I think we're just transferring the problem down to the 228th and Bothell Everett Highway. and 524 in Bothell Everett Highway intersections, which we already have issues with, and we're trying to solve with big infrastructure projects. So I don't see that it's kind of a home run solution so far.
Okay, great. So I think you've gotten some information with regards to 9th. Sorry, Bruce, did you want to, you had a comment on something? I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I think you've covered it adequately. Thank you.
Okay. One thing I'd like us to touch on as a commission, if we could, is that it's been spoken to, is that, I think it's 214th Street, the one that's kind of in the north area, and what the commission feels with regards to what we've been, the proposal with regards to, should that be a through street? Or to give them guidance on whether to continue to look at the possibility that that would be a through street that includes cars, or just a bike path or a walking path. Does anybody have any comments on that, so we can just kind of clarify that? Commissioner Curd.
Yeah, I have some comments on it. I think that realistically we can expect that pedestrian and bicycle connections on 214th are likely feasible, and also likely to do a lot of good for moving people if that's going to be our new level of service. But I don't know how much resources should be spent on still looking about blazing a car pathway or bus pathway through 214th. That being said, I do realize that keeping options open at this 30,000 foot process is important. So I don't know what the benefit is of continually investigating it, because I don't think it's really going to be feasible from our current shoreline standards and our current stormwater discharge standards. I don't think that it's even worth investigating. But if it's helpful for the process in investigating traffic impacts, I think keep it in for this time.
Okay, great. Commissioner Olson.
I think it's important to focus on sort of the environmental concerns that were brought up, but it sounds like those have already been thought through, and that's how we ended up with 214th. I wouldn't want to necessarily focus on, I have a great empathy when you think this is the road I live on, it's going to be widened, and I don't like that. But I wouldn't want to sort of jeopardize decades of future movement based on that sort of sympathy alone. So I think it's important to keep reviewing that option.
Okay, I think you got pretty good guidance on, Commissioner Kiernan.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Olson. I think we should certainly start with the bicycle pedestrian access, with a strong emphasis there, but retaining the potential that at some point more intense use may be necessary. I'm just a little concerned that we get to a point where no new roads anywhere ever. I don't think that's a feasible approach either. But some initial connectivity for pedestrians and bicycles, I think, should certainly be looked at there, given how far it is to get an east-west route from Bothell Everett to 9th. I mean, it's a very long way. And similarly, we talked about 219th, and I'll reiterate what I said the last time. I would only support that if it were open to public safety. You talk about the elementary school. If we want to get an emergency vehicle from the fire station to the elementary school, it's an awful long way to get there currently. But if that road is opened, there was some discussion of it being only for employees, and I would not support it for employees only. It needs to be open for public emergencies.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just something I wanted to raise for the Commission's information. So as we're talking through this, I just wanted to remind the Commission to keep in mind what we're looking for this evening is a recommendation on a preferred land use alternative. The discussion is a lot about the transportation, and that's great. I appreciate that. This is all very helpful feedback for us, but I want to make sure that we also address the land use mix and intensity that is part of this preferred land use alternative we're talking about, because ultimately that's what's going to drive the transportation discussion and the decisions about that.
Got it. So basically at page 11, the middle ground concept, basically just looking at that map maybe, and just
Is that
Getting down the nitty gritty of
the focus you want tonight,
the,
Bruce? Okay.
oh yeah, there we go. Or that one there. Okay, the one in front of us. So basically, yeah, is there anything, and I did see that there was a question from the audience out there. If you could hold that for just a bit. Is there, as far as the middle ground land use, is there anything the commission is uncomfortable with, other than what we talked about earlier, but with regards to the office residential near 527 and 405? Commissioner Hampton.
Just to put it all in one set, I brought up the land use around 405. I liked the outcome of that conversation. I support the land use in this map and the preferred alternative, if you will. The one consideration that I think we might need is if we did move the bus corridor into the office park, it might make sense to revisit where that land use is. But that's a big conversation, so I don't think we should have it now. I don't know how that process would even play out, if you would have to do a new EIS or what. But I support this as is, with the consideration of kind of tweaking the land use around the freeway and the 500-foot buffer.
Commissioner Kiernan.
Yeah, I would agree. The regional growth centers are established to allow growth to be concentrated in one area while we preserve areas outside of that. This plan has responded to some of the concerns we've raised. Protection of North Creek has been a high priority. Making developable uses around, or desirable uses around North Creek was adjusted in response to our input. So any development will have impacts, and those impacts will be reviewed further down the road. At the high level, I think this is a good step in the direction, and I support this alternative.
Oh, 1 second. Michael, so we haven't actually closed the public hearing yet. If we had somebody in the audience who wanted to speak to something very briefly, would that be okay? Mr. Young, would you let?
The public hearing's not been closed, so that is at the chair's discretion.
If you would need to come to the microphone. Did you have something you want to comment? If you could keep it really brief, that'd be great. Thanks.
I don't know if this is on. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that there was concern about the fire and police access. Currently, right now, I live in the Crystal Creek 2 community, and police have access, emergency vehicles have access through our community, through a right-of-way, from 214th to 9th Avenue. So you're concerned about whether or not how fast the fire department can get to the elementary school. They come through there weekly on a regular basis to test the facility. Being a board member of the Crystal Creek community, we have to ensure that the gate access is allowable for both the police and the fire to come through. And they've got some sort of a little fob that they can come through and program that gate to the community to open and close. And we have to keep that activated all the time.
Great.
So your concern about that isn't really necessary.
Actually, my concern was about 219th, where there was a proposal or a request to make it for employees only. Okay. And my point was, if that is open, you should also have that access as well.
Sure, yeah, if it's going to be open for it, it should be open for everybody. Just similar to what we have, it's open for through our community, it should be open for them as well.
Thanks for the clarification on that, though.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Let's see. So I guess, Commissioner Cabe.
Just as far as the middle ground land use drawing that we're looking at, I think we talked about it pretty extensively last time. I'm in agreement with the general layout. If anything, I'd probably be in favor of going to higher density at the QFC development near 228th and Ball Everett Highway. And then I can't exactly remember the reasoning. Maybe it's the existing use, but where we have low office residential kind of at the center of the page, is that just to fit with what we currently have? Because it's bordered on higher density usage on either side. To me, it seems like it might be more consistent to keep that same density.
That's to better respect that there are townhouses being constructed there right now.
Oh, to make it the allowable use to have it not be, okay, got it. Are you referring to that the smaller, yeah, with the townhomes? Okay.
And if I recall, last time we talked about giving it some sort of a designation that would allow for maybe some redevelopment for a more intense, more similar use to what's surrounding it in the future, acknowledging and allowing the townhouse development, but also putting a second.
Wait, so basically not make it conforming, non-conforming, but also allowing?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, it used to be residential low, and we shifted it to office residential.
I guess I'm not talking about the individual block in the middle of the industrial park. I'm talking about right along Both Everett Highway. Are we talking about the same strip?
No, I think we're talking about two different things.
Okay, so I'm in agreement with what we did with regards to the individual townhouse project going in, that, that's kind of on an island. I just don't remember talking necessarily about the strip of lower density right along Both Everett Highway.
You talking about the area along North Creek, just to the east of Both Everett Highway? That's, okay, that's the teacher's property.
Okay.
But we referred to that in the past. And that's where we have, we've had a pre-application on residential development on that site. And I think that's one of the reasons we're recognizing that potential there.
And the west side is existing residential for the most part.
Okay.
It's also further than a 10-minute walk from major transit.
Commissioner Kiernan, did you? Oh.
No, I was just going to note that it does seem to follow the pattern we've set, that the higher density is closer to the transit, this is further away, so it's lower density.
I guess I would agree. I'm just thinking Bothell as a whole, nothing's really close to transit, and this is a stone's throw. Maybe it's not 10 minutes, but it's the closest that we realistically have across all of Bothell. So where possible, if we could maximize the density, that's more my concern.
So if I might ask for clarification from Commissioner Kaber, are you talking about then keeping it as residential, but increasing it, is that, I'm sorry, I can't read the map.
And can somebody point to exactly where we're talking about? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, okay.
So are you talking about increasing the density?
Thank you.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And if we have, all residential on the west side and we don't want to mess with that side, I can understand it. But on the east side, maybe it's a different story for what we want to see in our future.
Okay. Other commissioners have thoughts on that?
I tend to agree because 10-minute walk to the park and ride, okay, but there's a lot of transit right through there. Like, you're not talking about a desert where you have to drive to get to a bus stop. Like, it's just a transfer. That's a pretty, as a frequent transit user, that's a pretty desirable location.
I also agree with that. Commissioner Curd?
One of the, I would definitely support raising the density for residential there if we're going to be squeezing the balloon. But one of the concerns that I might have is adding more mid-block connections over 527, because if you catch a bus on one side of the highway, you'd have to walk basically all the way up to 214th or all the way down to 220th just across the street. And so I think that's one of the things that I could see more improvement over some, like a crosswalk, or probably not an underpass, but some sort of pedestrian protection there if it was to be raised substantially.
Commissioner Kiernan?
I would also note we have North Creek bisecting the middle of that with some setbacks there, and that'll limit the ability to have more connections across that that stream and the buffers associated with it. So I'm not, granted it's good for transit, but I'm not sure how much density we want to push right on that part of the creek either.
There are a lot of environmental constraints on that site.
Okay.
We'll take a look at that.
Yeah. Oh, Commissioner Hampton?
Just a question for the chair, being mindful of time. If we wanted to wrap this up tonight, would we have to close the public hearing and then entertain a motion?
Yes.
And so do we think that we have a lot more to talk about and we want to extend this, or should we try to wrap things up?
I think we can wrap things up. I feel like we're getting close to wrapping things up. I'm seeing nodding of heads. Yes. Okay, so let's do that. I would then entertain, are there any, I guess we can deliberate after this. Unless there's any other questions, main questions that you're looking to us for that you think we haven't covered. They're like, I can't believe they didn't cover that one.
Looking at the rest of the panel, Bruce, do we have,
That's the main one.
get everything you need?
Yes.
Okay, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing on the Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan Preferred Alternative.
Seconded.
Okay, so a motion was made by Commissioner Hampton, seconded by Commissioner Olson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. So the public hearing is now closed. With that, we can deliberate, and if there's not much to deliberate on, we can go ahead and move to recommend. But is there any deliberation on?
I think at this parliamentary procedure would have you get a motion and second on the floor and then deliberate the motion.
Okay, so I'm.
Can I ask a clarifying question for staff? The memo asked us to recommend the preferred alternative on page 3, but I'm noticing that the colors on the map are different than page 4. Is that because it's the middle ground concept and not the middle ground land use? So it's the concept we want to, okay, thank you. So.
I didn't hear a nod or a shake. What was that?
You want a motion on page 4? Okay. That's what I thought, but I wanted to ask.
That makes more sense.
Page 4.
So with that
page
being.
12 of the packet, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
page 12 of the packet.
Just so we're clear. Thank you.
Okay. So page 12. I'm crossing off number 3, number 4. With that being said, I move to select the preferred alternative as shown on page 12 of the March 4th memo to Planning Commission in order to further evaluate the environmental impacts and create in the Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan with the consideration of the land use around the 500-foot buffer near I-405.
I'd second that motion.
And Mr. Chair, if I could ask for clarification, I believe
Yes.
there were some other things that the commission also wanted us to look at in terms of land use. So I'm going to ask maybe Rachel if you could.
I heard a lot of discussion about between North Creek and North Creek Trail, the teacher site, increasing density there, but I didn't hear that as a recommendation.
And
so maybe we can.
And it would be hard to include probably all of.
Well, can I suggest maybe an amendment to your motion? I can't offer that up, but I would ask that you consider this to amend the motion to say, as depicted on page 12 of the packet, including what you discussed, which would also include looking at increased density for residential in other parts of the park. And then we've got our notes as to what the areas are that you were talking about, and we can go back and look at that.
Right, and just from a parliamentary procedure standpoint, I can't make the amendment to my own motion, so somebody else is going to have to do that.
Someone can offer a friendly amendment, and then you would have to accept it, and the person making the second would have to accept it.
I move that we make an amendment to Commissioner Hampton's motion to consider other areas of the business of the sub area for additional residential capacity, higher density.
Commissioner Kiernan, you second that?
First,
Is that
first I would
offered as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Is that accepted as a friendly amendment?
That is accepted as a friendly amendment.
And is that okay with the person making the second?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Trying to keep us
Okay,
honest here.
so all those in favor, let me
Now,
try.
now is your deliberation.
Oh, yeah, yes.
You don't have to
Do we have any deliberation on the motion on the table? The amendment to the motion.
I I have some deliberation. Could I hear what you heard from us? Just a list of the areas. Just
Sure.
Yeah, so we heard the teacher site area. We also heard the Kenyon Park Place area and just east, in between Cedar Grove and 405. Am I missing any?
The QFC, the area south of 228.
Canyon Park Place.
And I was just looking at that whole area, so I'd be fine with southwest, southeast, and northwest of that intersection, because I think it's all similarly served.
Southwest, south.
The whole area that's residential, medium zoning, so that, yes, that whole area that you're.
Okay, around the 228, 527 intersection.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay, just want to make sure we get that on the record, so we have.
Yeah.
Because we're going to have to go back and watch this.
So, I'll,
If
if
there's no other discussion.
This is another discussion. Entertain I guess we can take a vote on the motion, the amendment to the motion.
It was a friendly amendment. It's been accepted. So
okay.
There's no vote on the friendly
Okay,
amendment,
all right.
just on the original motion on the.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Please don't ask me to say the motion back to you.
Yeah, I think that as part of the motion, I believe the intent of the commission was to close the hearing as well. Or actually, we had a motion on that.
We already did
Close the
that,
hearing.
yeah.
We did have a vote on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're so used to me not doing that, so that's why it was. Oh, yeah.
I move to extend the meeting to 9:05 to finish the bylaws discussion.
Second.
All those in favor? Or actually, is there deliberation on the motion?
You don't need deliberation on that
Okay.
kind of a.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries to extend the meeting to 9:05 if needed.
Could I ask who seconded that? I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and with that, we will go ahead and step into the old business, which is the bylaws, which is in your packet, and you also got an email about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, again, as I stated in the memo, we, using that in the royal sense, I did not follow the bylaw requirements to notify you 10 days in advance, even though we spent a lot of time talking about this. So this is just to go back, you need to take action again to adopt the amendments that we talked about last time. I believe the chair had a question and a possible amendment, further amendment to these, which is allowed. If you want to do that this evening, you can make those changes. So if you have any questions about why we're doing this or any of the things that we've discussed previously regarding the bylaws amendments, I'm happy to answer those.
Yeah, and so the only friendly amendment I would have is because on page 1 of the bylaws, I guess it'd be section 5, part A, the last sentence of the chair shall supervise the preparation of the agenda for all meetings. And I have never done that, and the chair before me didn't do it either, because it's the staff that does it. So I guess I'd like to amend it, or I guess you could just remove that altogether.
However the commission would like to do that.
If that's okay with the commission.
Question, does staff share with you the agenda before finalizing it?
No. We've had meetings to talk about it the day of, but never before, no.
We've done some briefings just ahead of the meeting, but usually the agenda is set by that time. And we usually present, one of the things we include in your packet is a calendar for at least the next month. We're trying to get back to getting 2 months out so you see what's coming up on those agendas. But if you want us to do a consultation with the chair before we finalize that, we can certainly do that.
Well, I guess I would defer to the chair if it hasn't seemed necessary or beneficial.
I feel like it's in my mind, I would say in the future, if the commission would choose to change that back in, I feel like the staff does a pretty good job, and I have a lot of confidence in them and kind of bringing us the agenda for the meeting without having to consult with me first or any future chair.
Will that change after Bruce retires?
He's not going to retire.
So does anybody else have any other comments on that? Or we can leave it in. It just doesn't, it's not very relevant. It's just in there. It's just not, we never do it. So
I say strike it. The staff has more things to do than consult. Yeah, I say strike it.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Comment. So we do have the opportunity at the beginning of each meeting to comment on the agenda and make changes as necessary. So
generally, that's because we have to advertise that. That's generally limited to changing the order or deleting things from the agenda. Typically, we don't add things to the agenda if there's any, particularly if there's any action related to it.
So if the commission or a commissioner seeks an agenda item and it wouldn't be at that meeting, would the process be to suggest it at a meeting for a future agenda?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can always do that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
So do I need a second to the striking of it? Or how does procedurally?
I think you can just have a motion to approve the bylaws, amending that particular, deleting that particular sentence.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion at this time. Unless anybody else has any other questions about it. Yeah, go ahead.
I move. Wait, are we accepting this in the same motion? Okay. I move that we accept the bylaws and rules of procedure for the City of Bothell Planning Commission as stated in attachment 1 of the packet, such that section 5, subsection A, the last sentence is removed. The chair shall supervise the preparation of the agenda for all meetings.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Curd, seconded by Commissioner Kiernan. All those in favor of the motion on the table say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, staff reports.
All right, sorry to make you do that twice. So a couple of things on reports tonight from the staff. One is to welcome our newest planning commissioner, Amanda Olson. Welcome to the commission. Really appreciate you being here. Awesome. The council made appointments last night. We had 3 openings, one an unexpired term, which Ms. Olson is filling, and then 2 other appointments for the 2 of you that are not renewing. And those will start on April 1st. And that is Sarah Gustafson. I don't know, Sarah, you're still here? And also Jeannie Aldrichs. So we'll be doing a planning commissioner orientation. At this point, I think we're planning on April 1st. Maybe we can do it a little before that first meeting for our new commissioners. We're working on putting that together and scheduling that to help onboard them to the commission. So we would welcome all of them. And we do have one more meeting this month for our departing commissioners. So I really appreciate seeing all 7 faces up here tonight. This has been fantastic. Thank you for that. I also wanted to note for the commission, because I believe some of you had expressed an interest in attending this, the March 10th open house on parcel D is canceled. Out of an abundance of caution, there are a lot of things being canceled, and we just felt it was probably the more prudent thing to do at this time. There will be more information coming on future opportunities for that particular project. Also, on the dais in front of you, you'll notice there are a couple of pieces of paper regarding direct deposit. Since you receive a stipend from the city every month for your service on the commission, that's in addition to our gratitude, you also get the $100 a month. Right now, you're all getting a check, and we're really trying to get everybody onto direct deposit. So right now, none of the commissioners are on direct deposit. So if you would please fill this out and send it to attention Chris Bothwell in the finance department. And you have to include, there's instructions on the second sheet, and you have to include either a voided check or a voided deposit slip. If you don't have either of those, because not everybody uses those anymore, you need a screen capture or something that shows that you are authorized to use, that you are authorized on that account, so we don't deposit it in some other account. Yes.
Could you again state who it should be made out to, who we should transmit it to with spelling?
Chris, C-H-R-I-S, Bothwell, B-O-T-H-W-E-L-L, like Bothell with a W in there.
Yes, and it's
He is the finance director.
finance director.
Yes, and to City Hall, the City Hall address. He actually grew up in Bothell.
Thank you.
So would really appreciate all of you doing that. Commissioners Cabe and Hampton, you don't need to do that because it wouldn't take effect in time for you to do that anyway. So that's why you didn't get those. Sorry, not trying to exclude you from anything. So if you do have any questions about that, feel free to call me or Chris, but we would appreciate if you would do that. So Commissioner Olson, also yours will start effective March. The other new commissioners, theirs will start effective April. So we will give them the same information. I believe that is all I had. So
Great.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of your discussion, deliberation, your direction this evening on the Canyon Park project. As we've talked about before, this is a big deal for the city. This is a very important project. And I know the commission has spent a lot of time on this, and there's still a lot more to go on it. But it was really helpful for us this evening to get through this so that we have the direction that we need to move forward on the next big pieces of it, which are the sub-area plan itself, the development regulations, and then also doing the final EIS that will go along with that as well. So this really helps us keep all that on track. So thank you very much.
Great. Let's see, any member reports?
Not really a report, but I just want to say one more time to Lisa, Carmen, and Rachel that tonight's presentation was really great. It was well planned. It was thorough. It was articulate. And if it wasn't for the hard work that you did, you'd be back in 2 weeks. So enjoy your well-deserved night off. And thanks again.
Absolutely. You beat me to it. All right. I don't see. I'm surprised. Okay. I entertain a motion then to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
Okay, so Commissioner Hampton, motion to adjourn, seconded by Commissioner Olson. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.